This is part two of our conversation with Brent Gorda, one of the fathers of the student cluster competitions. Hope you enjoy it. From your little seed, your little competition with, what was it, 7 teams, that in 2007,
Yep.
it's grown to where we now have 3 worldwide major competitions with, let's see, SC had a total of 16 teams last year in 2 divisions, the Big Iron, which we've mostly been talking about, but also a small system division. ISC,
The little fee
the
stuff,
little
yeah.
fee, and ISC is going to have 9 teams this year. In the ASC, the Asian Student Supercomputer Challenge that just ended, they had a total of 10 teams, and they had over 40 submit detailed applications wanting to come from places like St. Petersburg, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all over. This thing has gotten huge.
Well, and don't forget there's one in South Africa, right? Happy Sitoli runs a project down there in December that's similar.
Is that a play-in?
Did you know about that?
I'd heard about that, and I had someone give me an email address for him, so I was going to reach out and ask him about it. Is that one of the sort of a play-in round to send them on to another competition?
I don't know the answer to that. You'd have
Okay.
to ask Happy.
I'll find out. There's another team out there that Boston that had they said a death match to get people on the team, where they pitted them against each other in programming and system tasks in order to qualify for the team, which was just hilarious.
Wow.
And they also ended
You
up.
know, one of the things that I've tried to shy away from is making it too much of a competition. I get a little nervous when we talk about deathmatch and so on, because again, every student that shows up that's put in the effort to make this happen and understand what's going on, they're worth their weight in gold. They're worth talking to.
Oh, absolutely.
We had this issue in the very first year. We had this issue with what the prize was going to be, and we went through a couple of rounds where some of the sponsors said we will give the winning team their hardware as the prize, and that was like I said, a 50 to 100K kind of thing. And I thought that would drive bad behavior, right? It wouldn't drive the community behavior that the students get. Another one came back and said, we'll fly them all to San Francisco, the winning team, for a weekend to stay up in San Francisco. And I finally decided the winning team should get a plaque and bragging rights, and nothing monetary, nothing financial, because I felt it would drive the wrong behavior.
I think that's correct. And the teams are competitive, but it's all in a spirit of fun. And I do push the competitive angle with them and with my stories, but again, in a spirit of fun and to get sort of a college football-like feel in order to attract more interest.
Right. Yes. No, that works perfectly well, and they all understand that. And when the competition's over, they all go out and have a drink together, and like I said, make friendships that last a lifetime.
The years that you were intimately involved.
It was 2007 and 8, and I actually did not go to SC08. I had to drive from afar because we were having our baby, Harley, my 4-year-old now, and so I didn't go to SC. I was letting Ricky Kendall do all of the on-the-ground work at that point.
Okay, that's good. And that was a great competition. Let's see, '08, that was what, in Austin, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We got Lance Armstrong's store, Mellow Johnny's. Their bike racing team showed up and ran generators to run one of the student teams cluster for an hour or two.
That's great. That's a great story. I got to see if I can find some pictures from that. That's the thing. There's not a lot of stuff out there from the early competitions.
I've got a huge number of pictures. We can sit and go through my photos. Okay? I'll try and go through and try and find you some.
And that would be super. So what do you think makes for a successful team and a successful student cluster program?
Well, for a successful team, there's no easy way. You got to dive in and figure out what you're doing. One of the judging criteria we had right from the start, and I don't know whether they still do this today, but we had luminaries of the community, Jack Dungera and Donner Crawford and Satoshi Matsuoka, and I believe one other, I can't remember the name right now, but they would go by and talk to the teams to get a sense for whether the teams really understood what they were doing and had done the work themselves, right? You could imagine that a team could show up and have let somebody else do the work. Don't think we've ever seen that, but what matters is what have you learned through this experience? And again, there's no shortcut there. What makes a winning team is a team that goes through and does all the work and makes it happen.
And they do still do the judges' interviews and the content matter experts for each application interview the students as well, or as part of that. That's a significant part of their score.
Good. I think that's great.
And how much time do you think teams need to spend when they're starting out down this? And I guess that's not really a great question because it's going to vary on what they're bringing to it, right?
Right. So what I've seen recently, I think, is that the teams will specialize. So there'll be one team member who's the sysad, one team member per each of the applications, that sort of thing. And I think if you silo it like that it probably saves a lot of effort per team member. But when we were doing it in the first case, the team that won spent a 3-hour-a-week kind of lecture series to talk up, here's what you need to know about all of the software stack, MPI, and the clustering and so on. And then the teams will go off after that and do the build and the running with the applications. So I think it's a considerable investment of time on the team's part, but like I say, it pays huge dividends when these guys show up and they're way worth talking to, and our community can go start to hire them.
And I know that some of the teams, and the one that comes to mind first would be, I think, Purdue. They've made a very concentrated, concerted effort over the past couple of years to get their computer science guys that are on the team, get them out taking those classes and talking to the science people.
And so is their team all made up of computer scientists, or do they bring in applications people?
For the most part, their team is made up of computer science people, but they're cross-fertilizing that by exposing their computer science people to like molecular biology or to atmospheric science if they're doing WRF or something like that.
Right. So an interesting story here. This past year, I walked up to the event, and there was a team from Texas there whose equipment had not shown up, but they were doing an immersive cooling. They did an immersive cooling solution. And I started talking to one of the guys and saying, so what is this? What are you doing? And the guy said, I made that liquid.
Isn't that great?
Chemist on the team who made the liquid to do the immersive cooling. And another guy walks up and said, I went off on the show floor and borrowed the hardware to do this. And of course the next question is, did the people you borrowed it from know you were going to immerse it?
Well, as I was walking away, I happened to mention that. Are the drives sealed? I know exactly the team you're talking about, and that's one of the great stories. First, in Seattle, 2011, University of Texas brought a vendor-supplied immersion solution. And it worked okay, but they got good numbers, but they weren't accelerated or anything like that. These Texas Tech guys, though, the ones that you're talking about with the custom fluid, did you get a good look at their hardware? They were using a boat bilge pump for their pump.
Yes. It looked like a Volkswagen radiator out of a bug.
It was actually, it turns out it was a transmission radiator from, I believe, a truck. And it worked great.
It was awesome. Walking up to that, you just get the sense, the phrase today is the hacker community, right? These guys that go out and just make stuff happen. I really got the sense with that team. They understand this stuff top to bottom to the point where they can pull out screwdrivers and bolt it together and make it work in a way that you would have not expected.
A team that will go to the point where they've got a chemist on the team that designed his own fluid, that's pretty committed to it. I mean, that's committed to the competition.
Absolutely.
I really wish that their system had shown up, because according to them, in their lab with their gear and their immersive liquid, they could pull a 4 teraflop LinPack, which would have won that year.
Nice.
And the thing that makes them different from anybody that's done liquid cooling before is that they were overclocking.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is excellent. That's the way you want to do it.
That would have lifted your graph up a bit here.
Oh, yeah. And that kind of takes us into a different direction here. One of the things that's been interesting to me is that even though a layperson from the outside looking in thinks that all these systems are the same, we've seen an incredible variety in the hardware and software that these guys are running. Even within the big iron, we've seen GPUs started coming in 2010. Before that, you saw people running different operating systems. I mean, vast majority is Linux, but one year the Russian team running Windows Server, Windows HPC Server.
And well, the first year Indiana University showed up with Mac OS.
Oh, really? How'd they do?
Well, so we only announced the winner, and that year it was University of Alberta from Canada. So they came in officially second, as did the others. Some interesting points here is that very first year, the Asian team that showed up, again under Dr. Chung, they used Intel CPUs that were announced that day. One of the rules that we instilled is that you got to tell us what hardware you're working on, and we are going to publish the LINPACK score. And so they had the CPUs that were announced that day, and LINPACK was published on them. You can imagine that could go a little bit wrong. So the next year we get to Austin, and a team's got a CPU that isn't going to be announced until after the competition. And we had a huge tussle there and ended with, the rule is you have to publish your LINPACK score at the end of the LINPACK section on Monday night, and your architecture. If your vendor's not willing to let you do that, you can't use this hardware in this race.
Interesting. That's how that came about. The university from Taiwan, the one you're talking about, they're essentially located in the parking lot in the heart of Taiwan's
that makes
high-tech
sense.
sector.
Now I understand how they managed to do that.
Yeah,
that's great.
Everybody is right in that complex.
Yes, absolutely.
They've had a really good record in the competition. We're seeing more and more heterogeneity in the hardware with the use of accelerators. At the Asian cluster competition, the teams were running Intel 5s and doing a options pricing exercise that they had to optimize for Phi. Mm-hmm. And I think that pretty soon we're going to see teams with wildly varying hardware.
So you control that with the applications, right? It's one thing to be the team that only wants to run LINPACK and not the rest of it. And I don't subscribe to that being a good idea. But by the applications that the judges select, you can dramatically affect what sorts of architectures are applicable to that year's race. And that might cause you to say we should use the same applications year to year, or at least evolve them slowly so that we don't change things too dramatically. Some applications don't work so well on GPUs, right? So you don't want to presume a GPU architecture and then go in and realize that your apps aren't going to work.
But then again, I'd point back to Seattle in 2011 when the organizers were pretty sure that at least half the applications wouldn't work well with GPUs. And the teams that won, that were very, very close to each other, both used GPUs and they'd optimized it themselves.
This is an example of Seymour Cray's line, right? Hire them young before they don't know what they can't do. The rest of us think, we'll never do that. That's impossible.
Yes,
and they show up and make it happen.
Exactly. And that's the great thing about this competition. If you could do it over again, is there anything you'd change? Or anything you think that they ought to be thinking about, maybe new wrinkles going into the future?
I wouldn't change anything in the past. I think it's been just hugely successful. And I'm happy to have played a role.
If you could change something in the past, it wouldn't be the student cluster competition.
Right, it might have evolved differently. I'm not the only hands that have had hands on the steering wheel for this event. I was just the first set of hands. So there's been a lot of people through with a lot of ideas and, lots of debates and re-debates over the same topics. But it has ended up in a really good spot.
One of the things that I hear from some of my pals in the industry is that they would like to see something a little bit more realistic that would require checkpointing, that would require having a significant amount of storage, optimizing I/O, and that sort of thing.
He wants to have a file system type test in there. Yeah.
That's exactly who I'm talking about.
A checkpoint test, that's the power's out, right? And if you can figure out how to fake a power out without damaging equipment, then the students would have to learn that they need to checkpoint. The I/O test is a little bit harder because the solutions aren't so obvious and easy, right? Do you want to pit one parallel file system up against another, or do you want to have a lower level object store type test? How much power budget are you willing to put in there? How much bandwidth? Are you testing latency, bandwidth, parallelism? I think it'd be a great thing to debate, and I'd love to be part of that debate to help it turn into something. It just, in my knowledge, it just hasn't happened at this point. The HBC community is still quite focused on flops. So this may be an area where the Student Cluster Challenge could lead the community by saying it's not just about flops, it's about big data too, or it's about moving a lot of data if you don't want to use the buzzwords. So I think there's an opportunity here, yes. Maybe we need to get Dustin on a call and twist his arm.
I really like the idea of bringing in more applications that are enterprise-centric and enterprise analytics, predictive analytics-centric too. That's where the industry is going, and that's where there's going to be an awful lot of opportunity for these kids down the road.
So you can imagine putting in a Hadoop test, right? And all that would do was fault in terms of the architecture, would fault local storage into the nodes, which might be an easy thing to do. And that infrastructure is quite straightforward.
That's a great idea, maybe for next year or the year after, because they're pretty much set for this coming November. The other thing that I really liked that they did, I think in 2010, was a password cracking
that was Bob
exercise.
Beck at that time. And there was a subtle little twist in there that some people liked and some didn't. But it turns out if you sorted your input deck, you could actually make progress on that application. If you didn't, the very first password was literally impossible to crack, and you would stall for hours.
And it turns out, if I remember right, that one team did that, and that was Team Taiwan. They did an initial sort and started working on the short ones first. I don't believe anybody else caught on to that, and I think that was their margin of the win.
I understand that they won it based on that. But talk about real world, right? That's absolutely real world. You got to have heads up and be thinking about what you're doing. Otherwise, you could blindly go off onto something that will never come back.
Exactly, and that's a great thing to see. And it's fun to watch and interesting to watch all the teams, maybe even more so the teams that end up coming up against some adversity. And it happens every year. Somebody's gear doesn't show up, or if it does show up, suddenly the thing's not running how they expect it to.
The teams are incredibly resourceful when it comes to that.
And had great attitudes about doing it.
Attitudes are the phenomenal bit. I really love going up to the teams and chatting with them and just asking them questions about how they did this, how they decided what architecture, what apps they're running, who's in charge of the apps, that sort of thing. You really learn a lot.
And that's something I'd really encourage people to do at any of these events, is go up and talk to the kids. Because first of all, that's part of what they're being judged on. I
would strongly recommend if you're considering hiring, young, bright talent, that you go take a look at this event. This is an absolutely amazing event for gathering talent up in one space at a conference that you're already at. Just walk across the show floor and talk to these guys and gals.
And if you're a vendor listening to this, I would also heartily recommend that you look at sponsoring either a team or becoming a sponsor of the overall competition. This is a good thing to have your name attached to.
I'm just talking to one of the teams right now about sponsorship. Now that I'm a vendor, I think it's a great thing to sponsor.
And we have some great sponsors. Intel's been a great sponsor over the years. Couldn't ask for any more support on the hardware side. I don't know of any team that has been not able to participate because they couldn't find a hardware sponsor. And that's a testament to companies like Intel, HP, IBM, NVIDIA, AMD, everybody out there. And that's a really great thing about this industry. So I think we've covered a lot of topics. Anything I missed? Anything you want to impart? Parting wisdom?
I think this is good. I think there's so much more that we could talk about. Maybe at one of these events we can sit down and have a beer and I can fill your head with all sorts of ideas that we could continue to talk about this. I suggest that you reach back and talk to some of the other chairs who have run this and get their input as well, because again, my hands were on the wheel early on, but others have been running the event since.
Absolutely. And we'll put this up in our archives for the history. Right now, the site we have, the studentclustercomp.com, is about the only place that has any history of this. And we're back to 2010, and this will go into our archives for the earlier years. So we'll start to create a record. Maybe a Hall of Fame. Would you like to have the Brent Gorda Student Cluster Competition Hall of Fame?
Just the Student Cluster Hall of Fame. That would be fine. The students make it happen, right? The rest of us are facilitators.
This is great, and I'm really glad that you and others came up with this idea and had the persistence to push it along and make it a reality. It's affected a lot of people's lives, and it's been just a great amount of gratification for anybody who participates or watches these competitions. So thank you for that.
Well, hey, Dan, I think these cluster challenge events are hugely beneficial to the community just because they bring in such young and enthusiastic new talent to our community. I'm very happy to have had a role in starting it. Obviously, it's a group event that takes a village to raise a child, as the saying goes, but I've been happy to be involved.
Takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a committee to raise a cluster competition.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, hey, Brent, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.